All right. How is everybody today? Welcome, welcome. Did the music work this time? Hey, Vela, glad you could make it. Awesome. All right. Before we get started, let's try something out really quick, though. I added a thing. So try typing exclamation mark, the number 8, and then the word ball, and then a question. And if it works, we should get a cool Magic 8 Ball thing. So in chat, type in exclamation mark, the number 8, and then the word ball, and then a space, and then any question you want to ask that's like a yes or no question. Kind of like the toy, the Magic 8 Ball. And if it works right, a Magic 8 Ball should appear on the screen, shake, and provide an answer. It seemed kind of small. Could you read it? All right, let's try it again. I make it a little bigger. Try it one more time. I could read it that time. Is that big enough? Yep. 8 Ball definitely got sass. Well, 8 Ball said it, so I guess it's true. So, welcome everyone. Since you're here, it's obviously bedtime, and I'm obvious. We got a new time slot today, so it's a little bit different. The earlier time slot just didn't seem to be working out, so we're going to try this one. It said yes, definitely. Take it, I need to find some way to make it stay up on screen longer. Is there an option for that? Doesn't seem to be an option for that right now. But let's move on to the story time panel. We'll try it again during intermission. But how is everyone? Timer thinks we still got 4 hours to go on our goal. I mean, I'll allow it. Anybody want to do a quick follow and pop us over the top and hit 50? I was trying to get to 50 before the close of the first month streaming, although as it's now December in most places, I don't think it really counts anymore. But we still got really close, which was awesome. It's been a great first month streaming. So anyway, If you're here and you have, or you're listening to the VOD later, if you have not followed the channel, please go ahead and click that button. That way you get updates. You can also add the Google Calendar, which will give you updates for all the scheduled streams and the watch party, which we're going to be doing every 2 weeks, which means this Sunday, watch party here. Haven't picked the movie yet. I was looking at Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but it looks like everyone would have to spend money to get that, and I don't really want to do that. So instead, gonna look for something that's actually included with the Prime Video for the watch party, and we'll do it that way. So if you have any suggestions, you can post them in the Discord under the feedback or general channel, or really anywhere. Just throw it in there. Tell me what you'd like to watch on Sunday, and we'll see about watching it. And we'll get together in the watch party channel in the Discord, get some popcorn, and hang out and watch a movie together. It should be a lot of fun. But today we are reading The Hour of the Dragon again. Been looking forward to this. I really love the descriptive language that Robert Howard uses. It's just a lot of fun to read. Last time we read, Conan had been captured after being paralyzed before the big battle, and Zoltatun had hauled him back to the enemy capital in a magic chariot and then thrown him into a deep, dank, dark hole where, in theory, no one can find him, but I'm guessing from the cover art that a woman of the court finds him and possibly gives him the key to free him or something like that. At least I'm assuming that's Conan, or supposed to be Conan on the picture. He's the guy in the picture's a little scrawny though. I don't know. Might not be Conan. All right. Let's get the book open. No, I don't want to read The Expanse. By the way, I've been reading the Expanse novels again. Not online, of course, since that would be violating copyright law. But on my own, I just finished book 6. So, all right. We were on chapter 5. The Haunter of the Pits. I don't know, I think it's bad enough being in a deep, dank hole, but if you have to have some ghostly, monstrous thing haunting the pits, I think that's a little too much. And as you probably just heard, got my tea poured and ready. I am waiting this time because I don't want to burn my tongue again. Conan lay still, enduring the weight of his chains and the despair of his position with the stoicism of the wilds that had bred him. He did not move, because the jangle of chains, when he shifted his body, sounded startlingly loud in the darkness and stillness. Yeah, I don't know if the Devi's in this one. I think this is further ahead in time than that story. And it was his instinct, born of 1,000 wilderness-bred ancestors, not to betray his position in his helplessness. This did not result from a logical reasoning process. He did not lie quiet because he reasoned that the darkness had lurking dangers that might discover him in his helplessness. Zoltatun had assured him that he was not to be harmed, and Conan believed that it was in the man's interest to preserve him, at least for the time being. But the instincts of the wild were there, that had caused him in his childhood to lie hidden and silent while wild beasts prowled about his covert. "Hey there, Dr. Zhivago. Glad you could make it." I was a little concerned that I hadn't advertised the time well enough and that people might miss this. Even his keen eyes could not pierce the solid darkness. Yet after a while, After a period of time he had no way of estimating, a faint glow became apparent, a sort of slanting gray beam by which Conan could see, vaguely, the bars of the grill at his elbow, and even make out the skeleton of the other grill. Yeah, I'm glad you made it to this one. I do hope you enjoy. This puzzled him, until at last he realized the explanation. He was far below ground, in the pits below the palace. Yet, for some reason, a shaft had been constructed from somewhere above. Outside, the moon had risen to a point where its light slanted dimly down the shaft. He reflected that in this manner he could tell the passing of the days and nights. Perhaps the sun, too, would shine down that shaft, though on the other hand it might be closed by day. Perhaps it was a subtle method of torture, allowing a prisoner but a glimpse of daylight or moonlight. His gaze fell on the broken bones in the farther corner, glimmering dimly. He did not tax his brain with futile speculation as to who the wretch had been, or for what reason he had been doomed, but he wondered at the shattered condition of the bones. They had not been broken on a rack. Then, as he looked, another unsavory detail made itself evident. The shin bones were split lengthwise, and there was but one explanation. They had been broken in that manner in order to obtain the marrow. Yet what creature but man breaks bones for their marrow? Perhaps those remnants were mute evidence of a horrible cannibalistic feast, of some wretch driven to madness by starvation. Conan wondered if his own bones would be found at some future date, hanging in their rusty chains. He fought down the unreasoning panic of a trapped wolf. The Cimmerian did not curse, scream, weep, or rave as a civilized man might have done. But the pain and turmoil in his bosom was none the less fierce. His great limbs quivered with the intensity of his emotions. Somewhere, far to the westward, the Numidian host was slashing and burning its way through the heart of his kingdom. The small host of Poetanians could not stand before them. Prospero might be able to hold Tarantia for weeks or months, but eventually, if not relieved, he must surrender to greater numbers. Surely the barons would rally to him against the invaders, but in the meanwhile he, Conan, must lie helpless in a darkened cell, while others led his spears and fought for his kingdom. The king ground his powerful teeth in red rage. I'm drinking. I'm just a little stuffed up. Also, it's barely cool enough to drink without burning my tongue again. Then he stiffened as outside the farther door he heard a stealthy step. Straining his eyes, he made out a bent, indistinct figure outside the grill. There was a rasp of metal against metal, and he heard the clink of tumblers, as if a key had been turned in the lock. Then the figure moved silently out of his range of vision. Some guard, he supposed, trying the lock. After a while he heard the sound, repeated faintly somewhere farther on, and that was followed by the soft opening of a door, and then a swift scurry of softly shod feet retreating in the distance. Then silence fell again. Conan listened for what seemed a long time, but which could not have been, for the moon still shone down the hidden shaft. But he heard no further sound. He shifted his position at last, and his chains clanked. Then he heard another, lighter footfall, a soft step outside the nearer door, the door through which he had entered the cell. An instant later, a slender figure was etched dimly in the gray light. "King Conan," a soft voice intoned urgently. "Oh, my lord, are you there?" "Where else?" he answered guardedly, twisting his head about to stare at the apparition. It was a girl who stood grasping the bars with her slender fingers. The dim glow behind her outlined her supple figure through the wisp of silk twisted about her loins, and shone vaguely on jeweled breastplates. Breastplates, yeah, okay. Her dark eyes gleamed in the shadows. Her white limbs glistened softly like alabaster. Her hair was a mass of dark foam, at the burnished luster of which the dim light only hinted. "The key to your shackles and to the farther door," she whispered, and a slim white hand came through the bars and dropped 3 objects with a clink to the flags beside him. "What game is this?" he demanded. "You speak in the Numidian tongue, and I have no friends in Numidia. What deviltry is your master up to now? Has he sent you here to mock me?" "It is no mockery." The girl was trembling violently. The trembles again. Her bracelets and breastplates clinked against the bars she grasped. "I swear by Mitra, I stole the keys from the black jailers. They are the keepers of the pits, and each bears a key which will open only one set of locks. I made them drunk. The one whose head you broke was carried away to a leech, and I could not get his key. But the others I stole. Oh, please, do not loiter. Beyond these dungeons lie the pits, which are the doors to hell." Somewhat impressed, Conan tried the keys dubiously, expecting to meet only failure and a burst of mocking laughter. But he was galvanized to discover that one, indeed, loosed him of his shackles, fitting not only the lock that held them to the ring, but the locks on his limbs as well. A few seconds later, he stood upright, exulting fiercely in his comparative freedom. A quick stride carried him to the grill, and his fingers closed about a bar and the slender wrist that was pressed against it, imprisoning the owner, who lifted her face bravely to his fierce gaze. "Who are you, girl?" he demanded. "Why do you do this?" "I am only Zenobia," she murmured, with a catch of breathlessness, as if in fright. "Only a girl of the king Seraglio." "Unless this is some cursed trick," muttered Conan, "I cannot see why you bring me these keys." She bowed her dark head, and then lifted it and looked full into his suspicious eyes. One second. Somebody awesome just brought me some decongestant. All right. Hopefully that'll clear it up in short order. She bowed her dark head and then lifted it and looked full into his suspicious eyes. Tears sparkled like jewels on her long, dark lashes. "I am only a girl of the king Seraglio," she said, with a certain proud humility. "He has never glanced at me, and probably never will. I am less than one of the dogs that gnaw the bones in his banquet hall. But I am no painted toy. I am of flesh and blood. I breathe hate, fear, rejoice, and love. And I have loved you, King Conan, ever since I saw you riding at the head of your knights along the streets of Belverus when you visited King Nemed years ago. My heart tugged at its strings to leap from my bosom and fall in the dust of the street under your horse's hooves." Wow, okay. He's got to be like... Damn. Color flooded her countenance as she spoke, but her dark eyes did not waver. Conan did not at once reply. Wild and passionate and untamed he was, yet any but the most brutish of men must be touched with a certain awe or wonder at the bearing of a woman's soul. She bent her head then, and pressed her red lips to the fingers that imprisoned her slim wrist. Then she flung up her head as if in sudden recollection of their position, and terror flared in her dark eyes. Whoa. Hey, Blakester, thank you for the follow. Thank you so much. That actually put us right over the top at 50. That's awesome. We should get some VIP rolls now, I think. That's really cool. Make sure you join the Discord too so you can hang out and connect with people and join us for chat and stuff after stream and that sort of thing. "Haste," she whispered urgently. "It is past midnight. You must be gone." "But won't they skin you alive for stealing these keys?" "They'll never know. If the men remember in the morning who gave them the wine, they will not dare admit the keys were stolen from them while they were drunk. The key I could not obtain, is the one that unlocks this door. You must make your way to freedom through the pits. What awful perils lurk beyond that door, I cannot even guess. But greater danger lurks for you if you remain in this cell. Ah, I wish it was 50 subscribers, but we're not there yet. Oh, awesome. It's been a while. I don't remember the name Blakester, but maybe you used a different name? I'm glad you found it, though. I missed that game. At least, I missed it before the studio got bought out and it got ruined. Did not like the failure to address game-breaking bugs and microtransactions. It really bummed me out. Then they did the weird, Battle Royale splitting the game thing. Ugh. King Tarascus has returned. What? Tarascus? Aye, he has returned, in great secrecy, and not long ago he descended into the pits, and then came out again, pale and shaking, like a man who had dared a great hazard. I heard him whisper to his squire, Aridius, that despite Zaltatun, you should die. I absolutely remember Gears and Skyghost. I've talked to Gears a couple of times over the years. He mostly played Miscreated and a couple others afterwards. What of Zaltatun? Murmured Conan. He felt her shudder. Do not speak of him, she whispered. Demons are often summoned by the sound of their names. The slaves say that he lies in his chamber, behind a bolted door, dreaming the dreams of the Black Lotus. I believe that even Tarascus secretly fears him, or he would slay you openly. But he has been in the pits tonight, and what he did there, only Mitra knows. I wonder if that could have been Tarascus who fumbled at my cell door a while ago, muttered Conan. Here is a dagger, she whispered, pressing something through the bars. His eager fingers closed on an object familiar to their touch. Go quickly through yonder door, turn to the left, and make your way along the cells until you come to a stone stair. On your life, do not stray from the line of the cells. Climb the stair and open the door at the top. One of the keys will fit it. If it be the will of Mitra, I will await you there. Then she was gone, with a patter of light, slippered feet. Conan shrugged his shoulders and turned toward the farther grill. This might be some diabolical trap planned by Tarascus, but plunging headlong into a snare was less abhorrent to Conan's temperament than sitting meekly to await his doom. He inspected the weapon the girl had given him and smiled grimly. Whatever else she might be, she was proven by that dagger to be a person of practical intelligence. It was no slender stiletto, selected because of a jeweled hilt or gold guard, fitted only for dainty murder in Milady's boudoir. It was a forthright poignard, a warrior's weapon, broad-bladed, 15 inches in length, tapering to a diamond-sharp point. He grunted with satisfaction. The feel of the hilt cheered him and gave him a glow of confidence. Whatever webs of conspiracy were drawn about him, whatever trickery and treachery ensnared him, this knife was real. The great muscles of his right arm swelled in anticipation of murderous blows. He tried the farther door, fumbling with the keys as he did so. It was not locked. Yet he remembered the black man locking it. That furtive, bent figure, then, had been no jailer, seeing that the bolts were in place. He had unlocked the door instead. There was a sinister suggestion about that unlocked door. But Conan did not hesitate. He pushed upon the grill and stepped from the dungeon into the outer darkness. As he had thought, the door did not open into another corridor. The flagged floor stretched away under his feet, and the line of cells ran away to the right and left behind him. But he could not make out the other limits of the place into which he had come. He could see neither the roof nor any other wall. The moonlight filtered into that vastness only through the grills of the cells, and was almost lost in the darkness. Less keen eyes than his could scarcely have discerned the dim gray patches that floated before each cell door. Sorry about that. I figured you guys did not want to hear me sneeze right into the microphone. Blake Bede, I remember. I remember that. Right on. Glad you could find it. And glad to hear from you again. Well, for one, it would have been extremely loud. You gonna stick around for the story time, or are you just stopping in to say hello? Well, I meant Blake. I figured you were sticking around random. You've been pretty consistent and awesome. It seems like you kind of like story time a little bit. I mean, I could be wrong. You've only shown amazing support, but oh, Sky Ghost popped in. Hey, Sky Ghost. All the old school H1Z1 people. It was amazing. All right. Well, let's keep going with the story then. I'm glad you're enjoying it. As he had thought, the door did not open into another corridor. The flagged floor stretched away under his feet, and the line of cells ran away to the right and left behind him. But he could not make out the other limits of the place into which he had come. He could see neither the roof nor any other wall. The moonlight filtered into that vastness only through the grills of the cells, and was almost lost in the darkness. Less keen eyes than his could scarcely have discerned the dim gray patches that floated before each cell door. Well, I'm glad you're here, Sky Ghost. Turning to the left, he moved swiftly and noiselessly along the line of dungeons, his bare feet making no sound on the flags. He glanced briefly into each dungeon as he passed it. They were all empty, but locked. In some he caught the glimmer of naked white bones. These pits were a relic of a grimmer age, constructed long ago, when Belverus was a fortress rather than a city. But evidently their more recent use had been more extensive than the world guessed. Ahead of him, presently, he saw the dim outline of a stair sloping sharply upward, and knew it must be the stair he sought. Then he whirled suddenly, crouching in the deep shadows at its foot. Somewhere behind him, something was moving, something bulky and stealthy that padded on feet which were not human feet. He was looking down the long row of cells, before each one of which lay a square of dim gray light that was little more than a patch of less dense darkness. But he saw something moving along these squares. What it was he could not tell, but it was heavy and huge, and yet it moved with more than human ease and swiftness. He glimpsed it as it moved across the squares of gray, then lost it as it merged into the expanses of shadow between. It was uncanny in its stealthy advance, appearing and disappearing like a blur of the vision. He heard the bars rattle as it tried each door in turn. Now it had reached the cell he had so recently quitted, and the door swung open as it tugged. He saw a great, bulky shape limned faintly and briefly in the gray doorway, and then the thing had vanished into the dungeon. Sweat beaded Conan's face and hands. Now he knew why Tarascus had come so subtly to his door, and later had fled so swiftly. The king had unlocked his door, and somewhere in these hellish pits had opened a cell or cage that held some grim monstrosity. Now the thing was emerging from the cell, and was again advancing up the corridor, its misshapen head close to the ground. It paid no more heed to the locked doors. It was smelling out his trail. He saw it more plainly now. The gray light limned a giant anthropomorphic body, but vaster of bulk and girth than any man. It went on 2 legs, though it stooped forward, and it was grayish and shaggy, its thick coat shot with silver. Its head was a grisly travesty of the human. Its long arms hung nearly to the ground. Conan knew it at last, understood the meaning of those crushed and broken bones in the dungeon, and recognized the haunter of the pits. It was a gray ape, one of the grisly man-eaters from the forests that wave on the mountainous eastern shores of the Sea of Viliet. Half mythical and altogether horrible, these apes were the goblins of Hyborian legendary, and were in reality ogres of the natural world, cannibals and murderers of the nighted forests. He knew it scented his presence, for it was coming swiftly now, rolling its barrel-like body rapidly along on its short, mighty bowed legs. He cast a quick glance up the long stair, but knew that the thing would be on his back before he could mount to the distant door. He chose to meet it face to face. Conan stepped out into the nearest square of moonlight, so as to have all the advantage of illumination that he could, for the beast, he knew, could see better than himself in the dark. Instantly the beast saw him. Its great yellow tusk gleamed in the shadows, but it made no sound. Creatures of night and the silence, the gray apes of Viliet were voiceless, but in its dim, hideous features, which were a bestial travesty of a human face, showed ghastly exultation. Conan stood poised, watching the oncoming monster without a quiver. He knew he must stake his life on one thrust. There would be no chance for another, nor would there be time to strike and spring away. The first blow must kill, and kill instantly, if he hoped to survive that awful grapple. He swept his gaze over the short, squat throat, the hairy swag belly. Swag belly, all right, that's awesome. And the mighty breast, swelling in giant arches like twin shields. It must be the heart. Better to risk the blade being deflected by the heavy ribs than to strike and where a stroke was not instantly fatal. With full realization of the odds, Conan matched his speed of eye and hand and his muscular power against the brute might and ferocity of the man-eater. He must meet the brute breast to breast, strike a death blow, and then trust to the ruggedness of his frame to survive the instant of manhandling that was sure to be his. As the ape came rolling in on him, swinging wide its terrible arms, he plunged in between them and struck with all his desperate power. He felt the blade sink to the hilt in the hairy breast, and instantly, releasing it, he ducked his head and bunched his whole body into one compact mass of knotted muscles. And as he did so, he grasped the closing arms and drove his knee fiercely into the monster's belly, bracing him against that crushing grapple. For one dizzy instant, he felt as if he were being dismembered in the grip of an earthquake. Then suddenly he was free, sprawling on the floor, and the monster was gasping out its life beneath him, its red eyes turned upward, the hilt to the poignard quivering in its breast. His desperate stab had gone home. Conan was panting as if after long conflict, trembling in every limb. Some of his joints felt as if they had been dislocated, and blood dripped from scratches on his skin where the monster's talons had ripped. His muscles and tendons had been savagely wrenched and twisted. If the beast had lived a second longer, it would surely have dismembered him. But the Cimmerian's mighty strength had resisted. For the fleeting instant it had endured the dying convulsion of the ape that would have torn a lesser man limb from limb. Chapter 6. The Thrust of a Knife. Conan stooped and tore the knife from the monster's breast. Then he went swiftly up the stair. What other shapes of fear the darkness held he could not guess, but he had no desire to encounter any more. This touch-and-go sort of battling was too strenuous, even for the giant Cimmerian. The moonlight was fading from the floor, the darkness closing in, and something like panic pursued him up the stair. He breathed a gusty sigh of relief when he reached the head and felt the third key turn in the lock. He opened the door slightly and craned his neck to peer through, half expecting an attack from some human or bestial enemy. He looked into a bare stone corridor, dimly lighted, and a slender, supple figure stood before the door. "Your Majesty!" It was a low, vibrant cry, half in relief and half in fear. The girl sprang to his side, then hesitated as if abashed. "You bleed," she said. "You've been hurt." He brushed aside the implication with an impatient hand. "Scratches that wouldn't hurt a baby. Your skewer came in handy, though. But for it, Tarascus monkey would be cracking my shin bones for the marrow right now. But what now?" "Follow me," she whispered. "I will lead you outside the city wall. I have a horse concealed there." "Hey, Vela, she's got a horse outside." She turned to lead the way down the corridor, but he laid a heavy hand on her naked shoulder. "Walk beside me," he instructed her softly, passing his massive arm around about her lithe waist. "You played me fair so far, and I'm inclined to believe in you, but I have lived this long only because I've trusted no one too far, man or woman. So, now if you play me false, you won't live to enjoy the jest." She did not flinch at the sight of the reddened poignard, or the contact of his hard muscles about her supple body. "Cut me down without mercy if I play you false," she answered. "The very feel of your arm about me, even in menace, is as the fulfillment of a dream." Sorry, I can't keep a straight face with that. The vaulted corridor ended at a door, which she opened. Yep, you'll definitely have to play that song. There's a song called "Horse Outside." If anybody wants to hear it, jump in the Discord after the stream. We'll give it a listen. It's a great song. It's hilarious. The video makes it even better. The vaulted corridor ended at a door, which she opened. Outside lay another man, a giant in turban and silk loincloth, with a curved sword lying on the flags near his hand. He did not move. "I drugged his wine," she whispered, swerving to avoid the recumbent figure. "He is the last and outer guard of the pits. None ever escaped from them before, and none has ever wished to seek them. So only these men guard them. Only these, of all the servants, knew it was King Conan that Zaltatun brought a prisoner in his chariot." I was watching, sleepless, from an upper casement that opened into the court, while the other girls slept, for I knew that a battle was being fought, or had been fought, in the west, and I feared for you. I saw the men carry you up the stair, and I recognized you in the torchlight. I slipped into this wing of the palace tonight, in time to see them carry you to the pits. I had not dared come here before nightfall. You must have lain in drugged senselessness all day in Zaltatun's chamber. Oh, let us be wary. Strange things are afoot in the palace tonight. The slaves said that Zaltatun slept as he often sleeps, drugged by the lotus of Stygia. But Tarascus is in the palace. He entered secretly through the postern, wrapped in his cloak, which was dusty as if with long travel, and attended only by his squire, the lean, silent Aridius. I cannot understand, but I am afraid. They came out at the foot of a narrow winding stair, and mounting it, passed through a narrow panel which she slid aside. When they had passed through, she slipped it back in place, and it became merely a portion of the ornate wall. They were in a more spacious corridor, carpeted and tapestried, over which hanging lamps shed a golden glow. Conan listened intently, but he heard no sound throughout the palace. He did not know in which part of the palace he was, or in which direction lay the chamber of Zaltatun. The girl was trembling as she drew him along the corridor, to halt presently beside an alcove masked with satin tapestry. Drawing this aside, she motioned for him to step into the niche and whispered, "Wait here. Beyond that corridor at the end of the beyond that door at the end of the corridor, we are likely to meet slaves or eunuchs at any time of the day or night. I will go and see if the way is clear before we essay it." Instantly, his hair-trigger suspicions were aroused. "Are you leading me into a trap?" Tears sprang into her dark eyes. She sank to her knees and seized his muscular hand. "Oh, my king, do not mistrust me now." Her voice shook with desperate urgency. "If you doubt and hesitate, we are lost. Why should I bring you up out of the pits to betray you now?" I mean, she's got a good point. He was going to die shortly if she hadn't done that. "All right," he muttered. "I'll trust you. Though by Crom, the habits of a lifetime are not easily put aside. Yet I wouldn't harm you now, if you brought all the swordsmen in Numidia upon me. But for you, Tarascus' cursed ape would have come upon me in chains and unarmed. Do as you wish, girl." Kissing his hands, she sprang lithely up and ran down the corridor, to vanish through a heavy double door. He glanced after her, wondering if he was a fool to trust her. Then he shrugged his mighty shoulders and pulled the satin hangings together, masking his refuge. It was not strange that a passionate young beauty should be risking her life to aid him. Such things had happened often enough in his life. Many women had looked on him with favor, in the days of his wanderings and in the time of his kingship. Yet he did not remain motionless in the alcove, waiting for her return. Following his instincts, he explored the niche for another exit, and presently found one, the opening of a narrow passage, masked by tapestries, that ran to an ornately carved door, barely visible in the dim light that filtered in from the outer corridor. And as he stared into it, somewhere beyond that carven door, he heard the sound of another door opening and shutting, and then a low mumble of voices. The familiar sound of one of those voices caused a sinister expression to cross his dark face. Without hesitation, he glided down the passage and crouched like a stalking panther beside the door. It was not locked, and manipulating it delicately, he pushed it open a crack, with a reckless disregard for possible consequences that only he could have explained or defended. It was masked on the other side by tapestries, but through a thin slit in the velvet, he looked into a chamber lit by a candle on an ebony table. There were two men in that chamber. One was a scarred, sinister-looking ruffian in leather breeks and ragged cloak. The other was Tarascus, king of Numidia. Tarascus seemed ill at ease. He was slightly pale, and he kept starting and glancing about him, as if expecting and fearing to hear some sound or footstep. "Go swiftly and at once," he was saying. "He is deep in drugged slumber, but I know not when he may awaken." "Strange to hear words of fear issuing from the lips of Tarascus," rumbled the other in a harsh, deep voice. The king frowned. "I fear no common man, as you well know. But when I saw the cliffs fall at Valkia, I knew that this devil we had resurrected was no charlatan. I fear his powers, because I do not know the full extent of them. But I know that somehow they are connected with this accursed thing which I have stolen from him. It brought him back to life, so it must be the source of his sorcery. He had it hidden well, but following my secret order, a slave spied on him and saw him place it in a golden chest, and saw where he hid the chest. Even so, I would not have dared steal it had Zaltatun himself not been sunk in lotus slumber. I believe it is the secret of his power. With it, Orestes brought him back to life. With it, he will make us all slaves if we are not wary. So take it and cast it into the sea as I have bidden you, and be sure that you are so far from land that neither tide nor storm can wash it up on the beach. You have been paid." "So I have," grunted the ruffian, "and I owe more than gold to you, king. I owe you a debt of gratitude. Even thieves can be grateful." Whatever debt you may feel you owe me, answered Tarascus, will be paid when you have hurled this thing into the sea. I'll ride for Zingara and take ship from Cordova, promised the other. I dare not show my head in Argos, because of the matter of a murder or so. I care not, so it is done. Here it is. A horse awaits you in the court. Go, and go swiftly. Something passed between them, something that flamed like living fire. Conan had only a brief glimpse of it, and then the ruffian pulled a slouch hat over his eyes, drew his cloak about his shoulder, and hurried from the chamber. And as the door closed behind him, Conan moved with the devastating fury of unchained bloodlust. He had held himself in check so long as he could. The sight of his enemy so near him set his wild blood seething and swept away all caution and restraint. Tarascus was turning toward an inner door when Conan tore aside the hangings and leaped like a blood-mad panther into the room. Tarascus wheeled, but even before he could recognize his attacker, Conan's poignard ripped into him. But the blow was not mortal, as Conan knew the instant he struck. His foot had caught in a fold of the curtains and tripped him as he leaped. The point fleshed itself in Tarascus' shoulder and plowed down along his ribs, and the king of Numidia screamed. The impact of the blow and Conan's lunging body hurled him back against the table, and it toppled and the candle went out. They were both carried to the floor by the violence of Conan's rush, and the foot of the tapestry hampered them both in its folds. Conan was stabbing blindly in the dark, Tarascus screaming in a frenzy of panicky terror. As if fear lent him superhuman energy, Tarascus tore free and blundered away in the darkness, shrieking, "Help! Guards! Aretius! Orestes! Orestes!" Conan rose, kicking himself free of the tangling tapestries and the broken table, cursing with the bitterness of his bloodthirsty disappointment. He was confused and ignorant of the plan of the palace. The yells of Tarascus were still resounding in the distance, and a wild outcry was bursting forth in answer. The Numidian had escaped him in the darkness, and Conan did not know which way he had gone. The Cimmerian's rash stroke for vengeance had failed, and there remained only the task of saving his own hide, if he could. Swearing luridly, Conan ran back down the passage and into the alcove, glaring out into the lighted corridor, just as Zenobia came running up, her dark eyes dilated with terror. "Oh, what has happened?" she cried. "The palace is roused. I swear I have not betrayed you." "No, it was I who stirred up this hornet's nest," he grunted. "I tried to pay off a score. What's the shortest way out of this?" She caught his wrist and ran fleetly down the corridor. But before they reached the heavy door at the other end, muffled shouts arose from behind it, and the portals began to shake under an assault from the other side. Zenobia wrung her hands and whimpered. "We're cut off. I locked that door as I returned through it, but they will burst it in a moment. The way to the postern gate lies through it." Conan wheeled. Up the corridor, though still out of sight, he heard a rising clamor that told him his foes were behind as well as before him. "Quick! Into this door!" the girl cried desperately, running across the corridor and throwing open the door of a chamber. Conan followed her through, and then through the gold catch behind them. They stood in an ornately furnished chamber, empty but for themselves, and she drew him to a gold-barred window through which he saw trees and shrubbery. "You're strong," she panted. "If you can tear these bars away, you may yet escape. The garden is full of guards, but the shrubs are thick, and you may avoid them. The southern wall is also the outer wall of the city. Once over that, you have a chance to get away. A horse is hidden for you in a thicket beside the road that runs westward, a few hundred paces to the south of the Fountain of Thrallos. You know where it is?" "Aye, but what of you? I had meant to take you with me." A flood of joy lightened her beautiful face. "Then my cup of happiness is brimming, but I will not hamper your escape. Burdened with me, you would fail. Nay, do not fear for me. They will never suspect that I aided you willingly. Go. What you have just said will glorify my life throughout the long years. I mean, I don't really buy her reasoning there. Because how could he possibly have, captured and threatened her for aid, drugged and locked in a cell? He caught her up in his iron arms, crushed her slim, vibrant figure to him, and kissed her fiercely on eyes, cheeks, throat, and lips, until she lay panting in his embrace, gusty and tempestuous as a storm wind. Even his lovemaking was violent. I'll go, he muttered, but by Crom I'll come for you some day. Wheeling, he gripped the gold bars and tore them from their sockets with one tremendous wrench, threw a leg over the sill, and went down swiftly, clinging to the ornaments on the wall. He hit the ground running and melted like a shadow into the maze of towering rose bushes and spreading trees. The one look he cast back over his shoulder showed him Zenobia leaning over the windowsill, her arms stretched after him in mute farewell and renunciation. Guards were running through the garden, all converging toward the palace, where the clamor momentarily grew louder. Tall men in burnished cuirasses and crested helmets of polished bronze. The starlight struck glints from their gleaming armor among the trees, betraying their every movement, but the sound of their coming ran far before them. To Conan, wilderness bred, their rush through the shrubbery was like the blundering stampede of cattle. Some of them passed within a few feet of where he lay flat in a thick cluster of bushes, and never guessed his presence. With the palace as their goal, they were oblivious to all else about them. When they had gone, shouting on, he rose and fled through the garden with no more noise than a panther would have made. So quickly he came to the southern wall and mounted the steps that led to the parapet. The wall was made to keep people out, not in. No sentry patrolling the battlements was in sight. Crouching by an embrasure, he glanced back at the great palace, rearing above the cypresses behind him. Lights blazed from every window, and he could see figures flitting back and forth across them, like puppets on invisible strings. He grinned hardly, shook his fist in a gesture of farewell and menace, and let himself over the outer rim of the parapet. A low tree, a few yards below the parapet, received Conan's weight as he dropped noiselessly into the branches. An instant later, he was racing through the shadows with the swinging hillman's stride that eats up long miles. Gardens and pleasure villas surrounded the walls of Belverus. Drowsy slaves, sleeping by their watchmen's pikes, did not see the swift and furtive figure that scaled walls, crossed alleys made by arching branches of trees, and threaded a noiseless way through orchards and vineyards. Watchdogs woke and lifted their deep, booming clamor at a gliding shadow, half scented, half sensed, and then it was gone. In a chamber of the palace, Tarascus writhed and cursed on a blood-spattered couch, under the deft, quick fingers of Orestes. The palace was thronged with wide-eyed, trembling servitors, but the chamber where the king lay was empty save for himself and the renegade priest. "Are you sure he still sleeps?" Tarascus demanded again, setting his teeth against the bite of the herb juices with which Orestes was bandaging the long, ragged gash in his shoulder and ribs. "Ishtar, Mitra, and Set, that burns like molten pitch of hell." "Which you would be experiencing even now, but for your good fortune," remarked Orestes. "Whoever that wielded that knife struck to kill. Yes, I have told you that Zaltatun still sleeps. Why are you so urgent upon that point? What has he to do with this?" "You know nothing of what has passed in the palace tonight?" Tarascus searched the priest's countenance with burning intensity. "Nothing. As you know, I have been employed in translating manuscripts for Zaltatun, for some months now, transcribing his Soderic volumes, written in the younger languages, into script he can read. He was well versed in all the tongues and scripts of his day, but he has not yet learned all the newer languages, and to save time he has me translate these works for him, to learn if any new knowledge has been discovered since his time. I did not know that he had returned last night until he sent for me and told me of the battle. Then I returned to my studies, nor did I know that you had returned until the clamor in the palace brought me out of my cell. Then you did not know that Zaltatun brought the king of Aquilonia, a captive, to this palace? Orestes shook his head without particular surprise. Zaltatun merely said that Conan would oppose us no more. I supposed that he had fallen, but did not ask the details. Zaltatun saved his life when I would have slain him, snarled Tarascus. I saw his purpose instantly. He would hold Conan captive to use as a club against us, against Almeric, against Valerius, and against myself. So long as Conan lives, he is a threat, a unifying factor for Aquilonia that might be used to compel us into courses we would not otherwise follow. I mistrust this undead Pythonian. Of late, I have begun to fear him. I followed him, some hours after he had departed eastward. I wished to learn what he intended doing with Conan. I found that he had imprisoned him in the pits. I intended to see that the barbarian died in spite of Zaltatun, and I accomplished. A cautious knock sounded at the door. "That's Aridius," granted Tarascus. "Let him in." The Saturnine squire entered, his eyes blazing with suppressed excitement. "How, Aridius?" exclaimed Tarascus. "Have you found the man who attacked me?" "You did not see him, my lord?" asked Aridius, as one who would assure himself of a fact he already knows to exist. "You did not recognize him?" "No. It happened so quick, and the candle was out. All I could think of was that it was some devil loosed on me by Zaltatun's magic. The Pythonian sleeps in his barred and bolted room, but I have been in the pits." Aridius twitched his lean shoulders excitedly. "Well, speak, man," exclaimed Tarascus impatiently. "What did you find there?" "An empty dungeon," whispered the squire. "The corpse of the great ape." "What?" Tarascus started upright, and blood gushed from his opened wound. "Aye, the man-eater is dead, stabbed through the heart, and Conan is gone." Tarascus was gray of face as he mechanically allowed Orestes to force him prostrate again, and the priest renewed work upon his mangled flesh. "Conan," he repeated. "Not a crushed corpse. Escaped. Mitra, he is no man but a devil himself. I thought Zaltatun was behind this wound. I see now. Gods and devils, it was Conan who stabbed me. Aridius." "Aye, your majesty." "Search every nook in the palace. He may be skulking through the dark corridors now like a hungry tiger. Let no niche escape your scrutiny. And beware. It is not a civilized man you hunt, but a blood-mad barbarian whose strength and ferocity are those of a wild beast. Scour the palace grounds and the city. Throw a cordon about the walls. If you find he has escaped from the city, as he may well do, take a troop of horsemen and follow him. Once past the walls, it will be like hunting a wolf through the hills. But haste, and you may yet catch him." "This is a matter which requires more than ordinary human wit," said Orestes. "Perhaps we should seek Zaltatun's advice." "No," exclaimed Tarascus violently. "Let the troopers pursue Conan and slay him. Zaltatun can hold no grudge against us if we kill a prisoner to prevent his escape." "Well," said Orestes, "I am no Acheronian, but I am versed in some of the arts, and the control of certain spirits which have cloaked themselves in material substance. Perhaps I can aid you in this matter." The fountain of Thrallo stood in a clustered ring of oaks beside the road a mile from the walls of the city. Its musical tinkle reached Conan's ears through the silence of the starlight. He drank deep of its icy stream, and then hurried southward toward a small, dense thicket he saw there. Rounding it, he saw a great white horse tied among the bushes. Heaving a deep, gusty sigh, he reached it with one stride. A mocking laugh brought him about, glaring. A dully glinting, mail-clad figure moved out of the shadows into the starlight. This was no plumed and burnished palace guardsman. It was a tall man in morion and gray chainmail. One of the adventurers, a class of warriors peculiar to Numidia, men who had not attained to the wealth and position of knighthood, or had fallen from that estate. Hard-bitten fighters, dedicating their lives to war and adventure. They constituted a class of their own, sometimes commanding troops, but themselves accountable to no man but the king. Conan knew that he could have been discovered by no more dangerous a foeman. A quick glance among the shadows convinced him that the man was alone, and he expanded his great chest slightly, digging his toes into the turf as his thews coiled tensely. "I was riding for Belverus on Almeric's business," said the adventurer, advancing warily. The starlight was a long sheen on the great two-handed sword he bore naked in his hand. A horse whinnied to mine from the thicket. I investigated, and thought it strange a steed should be tethered here. I waited, and lo, I have caught a rare prize. Huh. I don't know why Minecraft would lag out your computer like that. That's weird. The adventurers lived by their swords. "I know you," muttered the Numidian. "You are Conan, king of Aquilonia. I thought I saw you die in the valley of the Valkia, but—" Conan sprang as a dying tiger springs. Practiced fighter though the adventurer was, he did not realize the desperate quickness that lurks in barbaric sinews. He was caught off guard, his heavy sword half lifted. Before he could either strike or parry, the king's poniard sheathed itself in his throat, above the gorget, slanting downward into his heart. With a choked gurgle he reeled and went down, and Conan ruthlessly tore his blade free as his victim fell. The white horse snorted violently, and shied at the sight and scent of blood on the sword. Glaring down at his lifeless enemy, dripping poniard in hand, sweat glistening on his broad breast, Conan poised like a statue, listening intently. In the woods about there was no sound, save for the sleepy cheep of awakened birds. But in the city, a mile away, he heard the strident blare of a trumpet. Hastily, he bent over the fallen man. A few seconds' search convinced him that whatever message the man might have borne was intended to be conveyed by word of mouth. But he did not pause in his task. It was not many hours until dawn. A few minutes later, the white horse was galloping westward along the white road, and the rider wore the gray mail of a Numidian adventurer. All right, let's take a quick intermission there. Was there like an update or something, maybe random? All right, so for those of you who weren't with us before we started the story time, I added a magic 8-ball to some of the screens. So if you use the 8-ball command, you can ask it a question and you'll get an answer. The has all the traditional answers, but there might be a few extras in there. You'll have to play with it to try it out. You got jump scared by the transition? Okay. Not that I'm judging you much. I do qualify for affiliate to Coton, but I'm not going to do it. Affiliate requires you to have exclusivity with Twitch for live streaming. They lock your content for 24 hours. They also assert ownership of your brand and likeness. And they give you nothing in return. Your payment for that is they take 50% of everything that people spend on subscriptions and bits and everything else. There's no benefit to it. I love that you're the first person to get that one, Vela. Epic. But yeah, I don't want to sign away my brand and likeness in perpetuity for, no compensation whatsoever. It seems to basically be a way to lock in developing streamers into contracts with Twitch so that once they get big enough to have their own market power. Thanks, 8 Ball and Random. Awesome. So that once they get enough market power to actually be a threat, they're already obligated. So instead, I set up a Patreon, and there's a way to do tipping through Streamlabs that I'm going to enable. So we can do subscriptions through Patreon, which are actually cheaper for you guys. Because I set up the tier 1 and tier 2 at $3 and $6, which is cheaper than what they would be through Twitch. But more money actually comes to me than betrayed by the 8 Ball. More money actually comes to me that way in support. So I figured it was a win-win thing. So I thought that would be a better deal for everybody. And people have been really amazing with the support so far with the Patreon. Although if you want to support the stream, and you haven't already, the links to the Patreon are in the Twitch and the Discord. And if you choose to do so, I really do appreciate it very much. Vela and Random have both been unbelievably supportive with the Patreon, and I am super profoundly grateful to them. Although they both need to pick what story they want read. Yeah, Vela regularly calls me a goober. This is not surprising. So, tomorrow's stream, I figured we'd continue with mysteries. Like, I even decided to title it Midweek Mysteries. Figured that was a good name for the stream. But do we want to go with another Agatha Christie mystery, or would we like to try a different one? I mean, I'll ask in the feedback channel too on the Discord. By the way, Dakotan, if you're all right, if you're enjoying the stream though, you should join the Discord so you can chat and interact and connect with other people other than the ones you already have obvious connections to. I think there have been some conversations. Also, you can post pictures of pets in the Where the Fluffy Things Are channel. Which, I still love that name. That was a great idea, Random. Alright. Well, let me refill my tea and then we'll get back to the story. It was a quick 5 minutes, but... What? Man, I'm sorry. I fail. I'm sorry. You know I forget things sometimes. Also, there was love for the idea. Maybe not love for you specifically that time because I screwed up, but love for the idea, that counts, right? Please forgive me. I'm sorry, Vela. Alright. Well, let's go back to the story before I get myself in any more trouble. Chapter 7. The Rending of the Veil. Conan knew his only chance of escape lay in speed. He did not even consider hiding somewhere near Belverus until the chase passed on. He was certain that the uncanny ally of Tarascus would be able to ferret him out. Besides, he was not one to skulk and hide. An open fight or an open chase, either suited his temperament better. He had a long start, he knew. He would lead them on a grinding race for the border. Zenobia had chosen well in selecting the white horse. His speed, toughness, and endurance were obvious. The girl knew weapons and horses, and Conan reflected with some satisfaction. She knew men. He rode westward at a gait that ate up the miles. It was a sleeping land through which he rode, past grove-sheltered villages and white-walled villas amid spacious fields and orchards that grew sparser as he fared westward. As the villages thinned, the land grew more rugged, and the keeps that frowned from eminences told of centuries of border war. But none rode down from those castles to challenge or halt him. The lord of the keeps were following the banner of Almeric. The pennons that were wont to wave over these towers were now floating over the Aquilonian plains. When the last huddled village fell behind him, Conan left the road, which was beginning to bend toward the northwest, toward the distant passes. To keep to the road would mean to pass by border towns, still garrisoned with armed men who would not allow him to pass unquestioned. He knew there would be no patrols riding the border marches on either side, as in ordinary times, but there were those towers, and with dawn there would probably be cavalcades of returning soldiers with wounded men in ox carts. This road from Belverus was the only road that crossed the border for 50 miles from north to south. It followed a series of passes through the hills, and on either hand lay a wide expanse of wild, sparsely inhabited mountains. He maintained his due westerly direction, intending to cross the border deep in the wilds of the hills that lay to the south of the passes. Well, can you listen on the phone, Random? It was a shorter route, more arduous, but safer for a hunted fugitive. One man on a horse could traverse country an army would find impassable. But at dawn he had not reached the hills. They were a long, low, blue rampart stretching along the horizon ahead of him. Here there were neither farms nor villages, no white-walled villas looming among clustering trees. The dawn wind stirred the tall, stiff grass, and there was nothing but the long rolling swells of brown earth covered with dry grass, and in the distance the gaunt walls of a stronghold on a low hill. Too many Aquilonian raiders had crossed the mountains in not too distant days for the countryside to be thickly settled as it was farther to the east. Dawn ran like a prairie fire across the grasslands, and high overhead sounded a weird crying as a straggling wedge of wild geese winged swiftly southward. In a grassy swale, Conan halted and unsaddled his mount. Its sides were heaving, its coat plastered with sweat. He had pushed it unmercifully through the hours before dawn. When it munched the brittle grass and rolled, he lay at the crest of the low slope. While it munched the brittle grass and rolled. He lay at the crest of the low slope, staring eastward. Far away to the northward, he could see the road he had left, streaming like a white ribbon over a distant rise. No black dots moved along that glistening ribbon. There was no sign about the castle in the distance to indicate that the keepers had noticed the lone wayfarer. An hour later, the land still stretched bare. The only sign of life was a glint of steel on the far-off battlements, a raven in the sky that wheeled backward and forth, dipping and rising as if seeking something. Conan saddled and rode westward at a more leisurely gait. As he topped the farther crest of the slope, A raucous screaming burst out over his head, and looking up, he saw the raven flapping high above him, cawing incessantly. As he rode on, it followed him, maintaining its position and making the morning hideous with its strident cries, heedless of his efforts to drive it away. This kept up for hours, until Conan's teeth were on edge, and he felt that he would give half his kingdom to be allowed to wring that black neck. "Devils of hell!" he roared in futile rage, shaking his mailed fist at the frantic bird. "Why do you harry me with your squawking? Begone, you black spawn of perdition, and peck for wheat in the farmer's fields." He was ascending the first pitch of the hills, and he seemed to hear an echo of the bird's clamor far behind him. Turning in his saddle, he presently made out another black dot hanging in the blue. Beyond that again he caught the glint of afternoon sun on steel. That could mean only one thing: armed men. And they were not riding along the beaten road, which was out of his sight beyond the horizon. They were following him. His face grew grim, and he shivered slightly as he stared at the raven that wheeled high above him. "So, it is more than the whim of a brainless beast," he muttered. "Those riders cannot see you, spawn of hell, but the other bird can see you, and they can see him. You follow me, he follows you, and they follow him. Are you only a craftily trained feathered creature, or some devil in the form of a bird? Did Zaltatoon set you on my trail? Are you Zaltatoon?" Only a strident screech answered him, a screech vibrating with harsh mockery. Conan wasted no more breath on his dusky betrayer. Grimly, he settled to the long grind of the hills. He dared not push the horse too hard. The rest he had allowed it had not been enough to freshen it. He was still far ahead of his pursuers, but they would cut down that lead steadily. It was almost a certainty that their horses were fresher than his, for they had undoubtedly changed mounts at that castle he had passed. The going grew rougher, the scenery more rugged, steep, grassy slopes pitching up to densely timbered mountainsides. Here, he knew, he might elude his hunters, but for that hellish bird that squalled incessantly above him. He could no longer see them in this broken country, but he was certain that they still followed him, guided unerringly by their feathered allies. That black shape had become like a demoniac incubus, hounding him through the measureless hells. The stones he hurled with a curse went wide or fell harmless, though in his youth he had felled hawks on the wing. The horse was tiring fast. Conan recognized the grim finality of his position. He sensed an inexorable driving fate beyond all this. He could not escape. He was as much a captive as he had been in the pits of Belverus. But he was no son of the Orient to yield passively to what seemed inevitable. If he could not escape, he would at least take some of his foes into eternity with him. He turned into a wide thicket of larches that masked a slope, looking for a place to turn at bay. Then ahead of him, there rang a strange, shrill scream, human, yet weirdly timbered. An instant later, he had pushed through a screen of branches and saw the source of that eldritch cry. In a small glade below him, 4 soldiers in Numidian chainmail were binding a noose about the neck of a gaunt old woman in peasant garb. A heap of faggots, bound with cord on the ground nearby, showed what her occupation had been when surprised by these stragglers. Conan felt slow fury swell his heart as he looked silently down and saw the ruffians dragging her towards a tree whose low-spreading branches were obviously intended to act as a gibbet. He had crossed the frontier an hour ago. He was standing on his own soil, watching the murder of one of his own subjects. The old woman was struggling with surprising strength and energy, and as he watched, she lifted her head and voiced again the strange, weird, far-carrying call he had heard before. It was echoed as if in mockery by the raven flapping above the trees. The soldiers laughed roughly, and one struck her in the mouth. Conan swung from his weary steed and dropped down the face of the rocks, landing with a clang of mail on the grass. The four men wheeled at the sound and drew their swords, gaping at the mailed giant who faced them, sword in hand. Conan laughed harshly. His eyes were bleak as flint. "Dogs," he said, without passion and without mercy. "Do Numidian jackals set themselves up as executioners and hang my subjects at will? First you must take the head of their king. Here I stand, awaiting your lordly pleasure." The soldiers stared at him uncertainly as he strode toward them. "Who is this madman?" growled a bearded ruffian. "He wears Numidian mail, but speaks with an Aquilonian accent." "No matter," quoth another. "Cut him down, and then we'll hang the old hag." And so saying, he ran at Conan, lifting his sword. But before he could strike, the king's great blade lashed down, splitting helmet and skull. The man fell before him, but the others were hardy rogues. They gave tongue like wolves and surged about the lone figure in the gray mail. And the clamor and din of steel drowned the cries of the circling raven. Conan did not shout. His eyes, coals of blue fire, and his lips smiling bleakly, he lashed right and left with his two-handed sword. For all his size, he was quick as a cat on his feet, and he was constantly in motion, presenting a moving target so that thrusts and swings cut empty air oftener than not. Yet when he struck, he was perfectly balanced, and his blows fell with devastating power. 3 of the 4 were down, dying in their own blood, and the 4th was bleeding from 6 wounds, stumbling in headlong retreat as he parried frantically, when Conan's spur caught in the surcoat of one of the fallen men. The king stumbled, and before he could catch himself, the Numidian, with the frenzy of desperation, rushed him so savagely that Conan staggered and fell sprawling over the corpse. The Numidian croaked in triumph and sprang forward, lifting his great sword with both hands over his right shoulder as he braced his legs wide for the stroke. And then, over the prostrate king, something huge and hairy shot like a thunderbolt full on the soldier's breast, and his yelp of triumph changed to a shriek of death. Conan, scrambling up, saw the man lying dead with his throat torn out, and a great gray wolf stood over him, head sunk as it smelled the blood that formed a pool on the grass. The king turned as the old woman spoke to him. She stood straight and tall before him, and in spite of her ragged garb, her features, clear-cut and aquiline, and her keen black eyes were not those of a common peasant woman. She called to the wolf, and it trotted to her side like a great dog and rubbed its giant shoulder against her knee, while it gazed at Conan with green, lambent eyes. Absently, she laid her hand upon its mighty neck, and so the two stood regarding the king of Aquilonia. He found their steady gaze disquieting, though there was no hostility in it. "Men say King Conan died beneath the stones and dirt when the cliffs crumbled by Volkia," she said, in a deep, strong, resonant voice. "So they say," he growled. He was in no mood for controversy, and he thought of those armored riders who were pushing nearer every moment. The raven above him cawed stridently, and he cast an involuntary glare upward, grinding his teeth in a spasm of nervous irritation. Up on the ledge, the white horse stood with drooping head. The woman looked at it, and then at the raven, and then she lifted a strange, weird cry as she had before. As if recognizing the call, the raven wheeled, suddenly mute, and raced eastward. But before it had got out of sight, the shadow of mighty wings fell across it. An eagle soared up from the tangle of trees, and rising above it, swooped and struck the black messenger to the earth. The strident voice of betrayal was stilled forever. "Crom," muttered Conan, staring at the old woman. "Are you a magician too?" "I am Zalata," she said. "The people of the valleys call me a witch. Was that child of the night guiding armed men on your trail?" "Aye." She did not seem to think the answer fantastic. "They cannot be far behind me." "Lead your horse and follow me, King Conan," she said briefly. Without comment, he mounted the rocks and brought his horse down to the glade by a circuitous path. As he came, he saw the eagle reappear, dropping lazily down from the sky, and rest an instant on Zalata's shoulder, spreading its great wings lightly so as to not crush her with its weight. Without a word, she led the way, the great wolf trotting at her side, the eagle soaring above her. Through deep thickets and along tortuous ledges poised over deep ravines, she led him, and finally along a narrow, precipice-edged path to a curious dwelling of stone, half hut, half cavern, beneath a cliff hidden among the gorges and crags. The eagle flew to the pinnacle of this cliff and perched there like a motionless sentinel. Still silent, Zalata stabled the horse in the nearby cave, with leaves and grass piled high for provender, and a tiny spring bubbling in the dim recesses. In the hut, she seated the king on a rude, hide-covered bench, and she sat herself upon a low stool before the tiny fireplace, while she made a fire of tamarisk chunks and prepared a frugal meal. The great wolf drowsed beside her, facing the fire, his huge head sunk on his paws, his ears twitching in his dreams. "You do not fear to sit in the hut of a witch?" she asked, breaking her silence at last. An impatient shrug of his gray-mailed shoulders was her guest's only reply. She gave into his hands a wooden dish heaped with dried fruits, cheese, and barley bread, and a great pot of the heady upland beer, brewed from barley grown in the high valleys. "I have found the brooding silence of the glens more pleasing than the babble of city streets," she said. "The children of the wild are kinder than the children of men." Her hand briefly stroked the ruff of the sleeping wolf. "My children were afar from me today, or I had not needed your sword, my king. They were coming at my call." "What grudge had those Numidian dogs against you?" Conan demanded. "Skulkers from the invading army straggle all over the countryside, from the frontier to Tarantia," she answered. "The foolish villagers in the valleys told them that I had a store of gold hidden away, so as to divert their attention from the villages. They demanded treasure from me, and my answers angered them. But neither skulkers nor the men who pursue you, nor any raven will find you here." He shook his head, eating ravenously. "I'm for Tarantia." She shook her head. "You thrust your head into the dragon's jaws. Best seek refuge abroad. The heart is gone from your kingdom." "What do you mean?" he demanded. "Battles have been lost before, yet wars won. A kingdom is not lost by a single defeat." "And will you go to Tarantia?" "Aye. Prospero will be holding it against Almeric." "Are you sure?" "Hell's devils, woman," he exclaimed wrathfully. "What else?" She shook her head. "I feel that it is otherwise. Let us see. Not lightly is the veil rent, yet I will rend it a little and show you your capital city." Conan did not see what she cast upon the fire, but the wolf whimpered in his dreams, and a green smoke gathered and billowed up into the hut. And as he watched, the walls and ceiling of the hut seemed to widen, to grow remote and vanish, merging with infinite immensities. The smoke rolled about him, blotting out everything, and in it forms moved and faded, and stood out in startling clarity. He stared at the familiar towers and streets of Tarantia, where a mob seethed and screamed, and at the same time he was somehow able to see the banners of Numidia moving inexorably westward through the smoke and flame of a pillaged land. In the great square of Tarantia, the frantic throng milled and yammered, screaming that the king was dead, that the barons were girding themselves to divide the land between them, and that the rule of a king, even of Valerius, was better than anarchy. Prospero, shining in his armor, rode among them, trying to pacify them, bidding them trust Count Trocero, urging them to man the wall and aid his knights in defending the city. They turned on him, shrieking with fear and unreasoning rage, howling that he was Trocero's butcher, a more evil foe than Almeric himself. offal and stones were hurled at the knights. A slight blurring of the picture that might have denoted a passing of time, and then Conan saw Prospero and his knights filing out of the gates and spurring southward. Behind him, the city was in an uproar. "Fools," muttered Conan thickly. "Fools. Why could they not trust Prospero? Zelada, if you were making game of me with some trickery—" "This is past," answered Zelada imperturbably, though somberly. It was the evening of the day that is past when Prospero rode out of Tarantia, with the hosts of Almeric almost within sight. From the walls, men saw the flame of their pillaging. So I read it in the smoke. At sunset, the Numidians rode into Tarantia unopposed. Look, even now in the royal hall of Tarantia. Abruptly, Conan was looking into the great coronation hall. Valerius stood on the regal dais, clad in ermine robes, and Almeric, still in his dusty, blood-stained armor, placed a rich and gleaming circlet on his yellow locks. The crown of Aquilonia. The people cheered. Long lines of steel-clad Numidian warriors looked grimly on, and nobles, long in disfavor at Conan's court, strutted and swaggered with the emblem of Valerius on their sleeves. Crom! It was an explosive imprecation from Conan's lips as he started up, his great fists clenched into hammers, his veins on his temples knotting, his features convulsed. A Numidian placing the crown of Aquilonia on that renegade in the royal hall of Tarantia? As if dispelled by his violence, the smoke faded, and he saw Zelada's black eyes gleaming at him through the mist. You have seen. The people of your capital have forfeited the freedom you won for them by sweat and blood. They have sold themselves to the slavers and the butchers. They have shown that they do not trust their destiny. Can you rely upon them for the winning back of your kingdom? They thought I was dead, he grunted, recovering some of his poise. I have no son. Men can't be governed by a memory. What if the Numidians have taken Tarantia? There still remain the provinces, the barons, and the people of the countrysides. Valerius has won an empty glory. You are stubborn, as befits a fighter. I cannot show you the future. I cannot show you all the past. Nay, I show you nothing. I merely make you see windows opened in the veil by powers unguessed. Would you look into the past for a clue of the present? Aye. He seated himself abruptly. Again the green smoke rose and billowed. Again images unfolded before him, this time alien and seemingly irrelevant. He saw great towering black walls, pedestals half hidden in the shadows, upholding images of hideous, half-bestial gods. Men moved in the shadows, dark, wiry men, clad in red silken loincloths. They were bearing a green jade sarcophagus along a gigantic black corridor. But before he could tell much about what he saw, the scene shifted. He saw a cavern, dim, shadowy, and haunted with a strange, intangible horror. On an altar of black stone stood a curious golden vessel, shaped like the shell of a scallop. Into this cavern came some of the same dark, wiry men who had borne the mummy case. They seized the golden vessel, and then the shadows swirled around them, and what happened he could not say. But he saw a glimmer in a whirl of darkness, like a ball of living fire. Then the smoke was only smoke, drifting up from the fire of tamarisk chunks, thinning and fading. But what does this portend? He demanded, bewildered. What I saw in Tarantia I can understand. But what means this glimpse of Zamorian thieves sneaking through a subterranean temple of Set in Stygia? And that cavern, I've never seen or heard of anything like it in all my wanderings. If you can show me that much, these shreds of vision which mean nothing, disjointed, why can you not show me all that is to occur? Zelada stirred the fire without replying. These things are governed by immutable laws, she said at last. I cannot make you understand. I do not altogether understand myself. though I have sought wisdom in the silences of the high places for more years than I can remember. I cannot save you, though I would if I might. Man must, at last, work out his own salvation. Yet perhaps wisdom may come to me in dreams, and in the morn I may be able to give you the clue to the enigma." "What enigma?" he demanded. "The mystery that confronts you, whereby you have lost a kingdom," she answered. And then she spread a sheepskin upon the floor before the hearth. "Sleep," she said briefly. Without a word, he stretched himself upon it and sank into restless but deep sleep through which phantoms moved silently and monstrous shapeless shadows crept. Once, limned against a purple sunless horizon, he saw the mighty walls and towers of a great city such as rose nowhere on the waking earth he knew. Its colossal pylons and purple minarets lifted toward the stars, and over it, floating like a giant mirage, hovered the bearded countenance of the man Zaltatun. Conan woke in the chill whiteness of early dawn to see Zalata crouched beside the tiny fire. He had not awakened once in the night, and the sound of the great wolf leaving or entering should have roused him. Yet the wolf was there beside the hearth, with its shaggy coat wet with dew, and with more than dew. Blood glistened wetly amid the thick fell, and there was a cut upon his shoulder. Zalata nodded, without looking around, as if reading the thoughts of a royal guest. "He has hunted before dawn, and red was the hunting. I think the man who hunted a king will hunt no more, neither man nor beast." Conan stared at the great beast with strange fascination as he moved to take the food Zalata offered him. "When I come to my throne again, I won't forget," he said briefly. "You've befriended me. By Crom, I can't remember when I've lain down and slept at the mercy of man or woman as I did last night. But what of the riddle you would read me this morn?" A long silence ensued, in which the crackle of the tamarisk was loud on the hearth. "Find the heart of your kingdom," she said at last. "There lies your defeat and your power. You fight more than mortal man. You will not press the throne again unless you find the heart of your kingdom." "Do you mean the city of Tarantia?" She shook her head. "I am but an oracle, through whose lips the gods speak. My lips are sealed by them, lest I speak too much. You must find the heart of your kingdom. I can say no more. My lips are opened and sealed by the gods." Dawn was still white on the peaks when Conan rode westward. A glance back showed him Zalata, standing in the door of her hut, inscrutable as ever, the great wolf beside her. A gray sky arched overhead, and a moaning wind was chill with a promise of winter. Brown leaves fluttered slowly down from the bare branches, sifting upon his mailed shoulders. All day he pushed through the hills, avoiding roads and villages. Toward nightfall, he began to drop down from the heights, tier by tier, and saw the broad plains of Aquilonia spread out beneath him. Villages and farms lay close to the foot of the hills on the western side of the mountains, for half a century, most of the raiding across the frontier had been done by the Aquilonians. But now only embers and ashes showed where farm huts and villas had stood. In the gathering darkness, Conan rode slowly on. There was little fear of discovery, which he dreaded from friend as well as from foe. The Numidians had remembered old scores on their westward drive, and Valerius had made no attempt to restrain his allies. He did not count on winning the love of the common people. A vast swath of desolation had been cut through the country from the foothills westward. Conan cursed as he rode over blackened expanses that had been rich fields, and saw the gaunt gable ends of burned houses jutting against the sky. He moved through an empty and deserted land, like a ghost out of a forgotten and outworn past. The speed with which the army had traversed the land showed what little resistance it had encountered. Yet, had Conan been leading his Aquilonians, the invading army would have been forced to buy every foot they gained with their blood. The bitter realization permeated his soul. He was not the representative of a dynasty. He was only a lone adventurer. Even the drop of dynastic blood Valerius boasted had more hold on the minds of men than the memory of Conan and the freedom and power he had given the kingdom. No pursuers followed him down out of the hills. He watched for wandering or returning Numidian troops, but met none. Skulkers gave him a wide path, supposing him to be one of the conquerors. What of his harness? Groves and rivers were far more plentiful on the western side of the mountains, and coverts for concealment were not lacking. So he moved across the pillaged land, halting only to rest his horse, eating frugally of the food Zalata had given him, until, on a dawn when he lay hidden on a river bank where willows and oaks grew thickly, he glimpsed afar across the rolling plains dotted with rich groves the blue and golden towers of Tarantia. He was no longer in a deserted land, but one teeming with varied life. His progress thenceforth was slow and cautious, through thick woods and unfrequented byways. It was dusk when he reached the plantation of Servius Galanus. And that's the end of the chapter, so I think we'll go ahead and end there for today, so that we don't end up ending mid-chapter. Oh, what's everyone think so far? You enjoying the story? I am glad to see that we're getting more and more viewers. We're slowly increasing our average counts, which is really awesome. I want to thank all of you for coming and listening to story time and hanging out. And if you like what you see, please, follow if you want to contribute to the support of the stream and help me offer more. Patreon's available. And whether you followed or subscribed or anything, please do share this stream with others. Word of mouth is absolutely the best advertising we can get. And the more the stream grows, the more we can offer. I hope you do join the Discord and interact and come play some of the games with us that we do on Fridays and Saturdays. And this weekend we are doing a watch party on Sunday. So please come for that. And we'll watch, I don't know what movie we'll watch yet. We'll discuss that in the Discord, but it'll be a good one and we'll have fun and hang out. Thanks, Sky Ghost. And thank you for the follow, man. I hope you do join the Discord. Vela brought up the link. You can go ahead and join it there. What'd you think of story time? Did you stick around too, Blake? Or did you have to go? Doesn't seem to really be anybody that we know streaming right now. So I don't think we're going to do rating. Yeah, there's not very many. There's two others that I've found. Storytime Alley and Storytime Sunny. I feel kind of like the odd person out because I didn't go with a Storytime name. I went with Bedtime instead. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And Arc toward the end got pretty toxic before I quit. So the reading books and stuff and being able to chill out with everybody is a lot more relaxing than the gaming stuff was. I enjoy it a lot. I really like being able to just hang out, chill, and chat, and read good books and all that with people. There's a lot less conflict and drama and stress that way, which is nice. Especially with the year we've all had. Fuck this year. I mean, this year sucks. Yeah. Supposed to watch the language. That way we don't have to put a mature rating on this. Sorry if little dude's listening. I didn't mean to swear in front of him, Vela. But, alright. Do you guys want to do a couple more rolls of the Magic 8 Ball? I gotta add it to this last screen real quick. I forgot to put it on there. There we go. How's he doing in school, by the way? I know this remote stuff is difficult. My kid's been struggling. Her school recently put out another message talking about how they've had cases and infections amongst the teachers and staff and student body, but we've handled it correctly each time, and but we want to remind you need to take precautions. They're putting the onus completely on the parents and families instead of doing what they should for the school. And anytime somebody questions them on it, I sacrificed a lot so that my kid could go to a really good school, but it costs a lot of money. And she's attending the school with kids that are significantly wealthier than we are, shall we say. They're the sons and daughters of government officials and CEOs and all kinds of stuff like that, which has its own challenges, but it's a much better school than she would be at otherwise. And so I'm trying to give her all the advantages I can. But sometimes the inherent arrogance gets to me. They have this idea that because they're rich, they're somehow less subject to the virus, less at risk of catching it. Like the virus somehow cares what your bank account balance is, which is completely ridiculous. On the other hand, this is a school where academics matter to the kids, to the students. And if you're not academically successful, you're not popular, you're not well liked. People think less of you if you aren't. Which, up till this year, my kid has been very successful academically. It's just this remote stuff is kicking her butt. I know it's rough, but I'm glad they're going with the remote. It's safer and better until things turn around. I was talking to one of my kids' instructors and told her that my objective was not for the best outcome or a good outcome even, that I was trying for less terrible. That's where the bar is for me this year. Less terrible. Let's find a less terrible outcome for things. Anyway, doesn't look like there's a good raid target. So thank you everyone for all the support. This has been an amazing first month, and I hope to be doing this for a long time to come. Do follow on here if you want to catch some of the older stuff. Go over to the YouTube, the links in the Twitch and the Discord, or just YouTube, obviously bedtime. And subscribe over there. You can find all the readings that I've done so far, and I continue to update it with recordings of all the readings. Starting tomorrow, we'll also be doing streaming on YouTube Live. So we'll be actually streaming on multiple platforms. If you want to contribute financially, and help me cover the costs of the stream and make it financially possible to do this more than part-time, you can go over to the Patreon and sign up to support there. Anything you do is greatly appreciated. There are some rewards tied to the various tiers. At the lowest level, you get access to the community Minecraft server. I think it's either tier 1 or tier 2. You get access to live readings in the Discord that we'll be doing of modern books. So if you want to hear something that is not public domain, that's how you do it. Tier 2 subscribers also get to jump in and snarky 8-ball. Tier 2 subscribers also get to jump in and play games live with me directly when I play after the stream. That's partly driven by the fact that there's only so many spots in each game, and I don't want to turn people away if I don't have to. But in any case, and if you're really love the stream and really want to support, there is a Patron of the Arts tier, which some amazing people have done, where you get a private one-on-one reading, 2 1-hour sessions, book of your choice, anything you want, though I do reserve the right to veto it, because there are some things that I will not read, whether it's moral, ethical, or just really poorly written. But if you pick one that I turn down for whatever reason, you do get to pick different ones. So thank you again. Thank you so much. I was so glad to see Sky Ghost and Blake Bead. It's been a long time since I've seen you guys, so I'm glad you found your way here. And I hope you really liked it. So Vela, Random, always glad to see you. Hey, 8-ball says like, follow, and subscribe. Better get to it. But all right, well, I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you for joining me. Have an excellent morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And no matter where you are, it's obviously bedtime, so have a good night.